Visually, the dollar is everywhere. In fact, it is the epitome of a global brand. A $20 bill anywhere in the world will immediately be recognized for what it is. Psychologically, it represents much more than a means of payment. It's become a universal symbol of enrichment, of making it big. Just think of all the books and movies with the word dollar in the title. Economically, of course, the dollar is the key to everything. For some, it symbolizes the economic efficiency of the United States. For others, it symbolizes American imperialism.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy.
In short, when the dollar sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. In one of the most extraordinary economic sagas of the modern world, told here by the people who study it, contribute to it, or are its spectators, this is the story of the dollar's rise to power to become, in less than 2 centuries, the currency of the world. With one question, however: will it keep rising forever, or is the world, in fact, changing, and along with it, the fate of the American dollar?
America's greatest brands, Microsoft, General Electric, Harvard University, and the US dollar.
In a restaurant conversation, you'll hear the word dollar in every other sentence. It's very present. It's more than just a kind of money here. It's an obsession.
Whenever you see protests against the United States, you might see someone kicking in a McDonald's store window or burning an American flag. You will never see anyone burning an American dollar.
I know people who walk around Paris wearing jeans that have a little leather dollar bill on them, but I don't know anyone who walks around the U.S. wearing jeans with a euro on them.
To get the story of the American dollar, the best people to talk to are the historians, or in this case, the numismatists. This is where it's happening, at the biggest money show in the United States, in Memphis, Tennessee.
Designs were unique and were engraved like Picasso's and Monet's.
They're remarkable dollars. Well, what kind of price do you like?
It's $8 on it.
When you start a brand new country, you have to set up a monetary system, and for the United States, that also meant setting up one that was different than others, where paper money was going to be very important.
And you can watch how our countries change by watching the design changes on currency. And hopefully a lot of them collected because they think it's going to go up in value.
Now 95 I have now 10. 18,000, no. 17,000, here's a new bidder, 18,000, 19,000, 20,000, 22,000, 30,000.
I would expect that from the entire sale, it'll probably be about 6.5 or 7 million US dollars.
When the young American Republic was just starting out in life after signing its Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, it immediately found itself strapped for cash. Since the British were refusing to relinquish their colonies, the country had to go to war to throw them out, an endeavor which required a lot of money. So to finance the war, the country's leaders came up with a brilliant idea: issue paper currency.
When we make war against Britain, we issue this stuff, which is called continental currency. The individual colonies began issuing paper money, and the Continental Congress did as well.
We can see the word dollar written on these bills for the first time, but where does it come from?
It doesn't start in America. It starts, of all places, in Central Europe, where a large amount of silver mining was going on in the 15th century. And because of the origin of the silver, they were called Joachimsthalers. And that got shortened later on from St. Joachimsthaler to Joachimsthaler to Thaler. Now, it didn't start out meaning, it means valley for Pete's sake, but eventually it became the generic name for any large silver coin of this type. And eventually, it sprouted the name dollar.
As for the dollar sign, it also seems to have come from far away.
This again is a Spanish-American dollar. I'll show you something. You have the two globes of the two hemispheres. That means both worlds are one. And there's a pretty good possibility that that's where the dollar sign originated. The columns representing the pillars of Hercules, for that curve snaking around the two vertical lines.
After winning the war against the British, the Americans set to work organizing the country's administrative and political institutions. They wrote up the famous United States Constitution, and George Washington became the first president. His face has been stamped on every $1 bill since then. George Washington chose a former banker, Alexander Hamilton, to be his first Secretary of the Treasury. He now gets to have his picture on the $10 bill. Hamilton wanted to create a centralized federal bank that would be the only institution authorized to issue dollars. Such a bank, he believed, was necessary for the development of commerce and industry. Not at all, argued Thomas Jefferson. Today, his face appears on the $2 bill. In Jefferson's opinion, a central bank was unnecessary because he envisioned the country as remaining decentralized and agrarian. To better understand this debate, why don't we bring back the protagonists themselves? Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm getting you now.
Mr. Jefferson?
My pleasure indeed. Good day.
So, Mr. Secretary of the Treasury, why create a central bank?
We are $80 million in debt. I know, an extraordinary sum. The establishment of a national bank will support and stabilize our currency and give us loans in time of need. It also brings the eyes of the world upon us in a more respectful manner. You know, I find it a strange perversion of ideas, an idea as novel as it is strange, that men should be deemed corrupt and criminal for wanting to become proprietors in the welfare of their country.
I'm not advocating that indeed we have a poor citizenry. I believe that the money should be more equally distributed and therefore be greater in its utilization by the common man rather than a select few.
The affair ended in a compromise. In 1791, the first Bank of the United States was established in this building in Philadelphia. As a central bank, however, it left much to be desired. For one thing, it did not have the power to issue dollars. And its adversaries, who were opposed to the whole idea of centralized banking, were able to get it closed down 20 years later. In short, when the conquest of the American West began, the country had no central bank, and all the federal government did was to authorize private local banks to print their own dollars. So the question is, what kind of money did cowboys use to pay for their shots of whiskey? And when bandits held up trains, what did they find in the bags and coffers? Answer? In terms of coins, a whole hodgepodge of different pieces, gold and silver coins produced in Mexico, for example. In terms of bills, it was even more complicated.
For the first half of the 19th century, the U.S. didn't have a nationwide currency. You had hundreds of private and state banks that could print thousands of different currencies.
So what happens is, for 8,000 banks who are issuing 8 different denominations, and you get hundreds of thousands of possible denominations, if you've got a population which never sees anything in printed documents besides maybe a Bible, how are they going to know which ones are good?
By 1860, constituted about 10,000 different kinds of dollars that were floating around in circulation. It was a great time to be a counterfeiter. It was also a great time to be an innovative counterfeiter. Today, when you counterfeit a note, you create an imitation. But when you have thousands of different banks, the smart counterfeiters very quickly realized that the thing to do was, why bother imitating notes? Why not just simply create new banks that were fictional? And that's what many counterfeiters did.
And to complicate things even more, banks and counterfeiters weren't the only ones in the business. Railroad companies, hotels, and even stores printed their own dollars.
You went into a store in say, Philadelphia or any city or any place, and you took out a note, and it was a note on a bank in Tennessee. And so at that moment, you and the storekeeper would have an argument about how much that note was worth. You know, you might say it's worth $1, and they would say, no, that's not worth $1. That bank's no good. That bank's only worth 50 cents on the dollar. Can you imagine what this would be like today if every time you went into the Walmart, you had a dispute and an argument about the currency that you were offering? It was preposterous.
The situation was thus out of control when the Civil War broke out, with the Unionists in the North fighting against the Confederates in the South.
The Union was out of cash. You know, it had to pay all of its soldiers. It had to resort to some other kind of funding.
The easiest solution when you're short of money is to make it yourself. So like George Washington a century earlier, in 1863, Lincoln decided to reorganize the whole system.
Yes, I can hear you, sir, and it's a great pleasure to be with you today.
The days when anyone could issue dollars were over.
No, I think we have to have a standardization of our currency in this country. It has to be done with a central government and a central bank. And the only way we can do that is to establish a believable bank note for the people of America with a great seal of the United States with that eagle printed on there to show the people that we have one standard and that it can be a believable note.
From now on, there will be only one issuing authority of paper money in the country, and it will be the federal government.
And they issued a note that was very quickly called the Greenback.
The name Greenback comes from the fact that the first of these new federal issues had green printed backs. And the reason they had green printed backs was because green was impossible to reproduce by counterfeiting methods.
A green back on it. That will discourage the counterfeiters.
So whereas in 1859 you had 10,000 different kinds of currency, by 1866 you had only a handful, and that was it.
Abraham Lincoln is thus the father of the greenback as we know it today. After Lincoln, all dollars would basically have the same look.
They're fascinating. They're beautiful. Now look at the artwork on the back. Show him the Treasury note. That's my favorite note. This is number 2, that's number 1.
If you look closely at these dollars from the 19th century, you'll see there is always a reference to gold on them. That's what is called the gold standard, which means that the central bank will exchange any dollar bill for its value in gold. In other words, the total value of all the bills in circulation must never exceed the total value of the bank's gold reserves. So in theory, that should keep the government from succumbing to the temptation of keeping the money machine running.
By the turn of the century, by 1900, the U.S. had become the largest economy in the world, surpassing China and all those of Europe, and yet the dollar was nowhere to be found abroad.
Industry was booming, the stock exchange was on the rise, and people were borrowing more and more money in order to buy more and more stock. The government kept printing more dollars without any consideration for whether there were enough gold reserves to back them up or not. What is nowadays called a speculative bubble was forming.
In terms of financial responsibility, the Americans did not yet have an international outlook, and their monetary policy, which focused exclusively on the domestic situation, increasingly perturbed the circulation of capital. And this, in turn, adversely affected the pound sterling, which was still the dominant currency at the time. So, U.S. monetary policy had negative repercussions, and in the end, this led to the Depression.
The speculative bubble burst on Thursday, October 24th, 1929. The stock exchange collapsed. People rushed to the banks to exchange their dollars for gold. After all, they were entitled to it. It was written on the bills. Naturally, the banks couldn't pay everyone, and they had to close down. In just a few weeks, the country sank into economic chaos, and the Great Depression began. Millions of Americans would lose their jobs.
If you leave markets, financial markets, to themselves, they always go to extremes. And in the 1930s, the financial system totally broke down.
One joker out in Oregon was up to the situation with genuine handmade Depression dollars. Dollars designed for inflation, guaranteed to go a long way. Oddly enough, these bouncing dollars were actually accepted by local merchants. Elsewhere, even in New York City, the barter system was revived.
In 1933, things began looking a little brighter when the Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected President of the United States. The economic machine was starting to pick up again. That very same year, however, another leader was elected, Adolf Hitler in Germany. After the war was over, the victors got down to the business of rebuilding the world. As a result, they created the United Nations in 1945. To deal with monetary issues, a conference was convened in Bretton Woods.
In 1944, a certain number of people got together in Bretton Woods, a small town on the east coast of the United States, with the idea that, although they weren't the only cause, uncontrolled economic practices, currency wars, constituted one of the causes of World War II. And so in order to prevent that, a sort of financial UN needed to be established.
And it decided that one of the key spoils of the war would be that it would have the dollar now as the central currency in the global financial system.
The major currencies had been wiped out by the war, and we were all indebted to the United States because it was financing the reconstruction of our countries. The pound sterling was dead or almost, the French franc as well.
44 countries signed this agreement, basically all the major countries of the free world. The Soviet Union was invited but elected not to sign. This was really an unprecedented act.
Bretton Woods set up what is called a system of fixed exchange rates. The value of the dollar was set at $35 per ounce of gold, which meant that the U.S. government was committed to giving 1 ounce of gold to any central bank that presented it with $35. The exchange values of other national currencies were also fixed more or less permanently in relation to the dollar.
Having become the international exchange currency, the dollar is the currency of currencies. Being the country that issues the money that other countries use is a great privilege. Why is that? Because this allows the U.S. to have a large deficit in its balance of payments. Why? How does it finance its deficit? Like all countries, with its own money, first of all. But when that runs out, the other countries have to finance it with dollars, with gold, which they may have more or less of, and when that's gone, well, then they're forced to limit the deficit. So all countries have this sort of built-in mechanism that limits the deficit when they can no longer pay for it. Except the United States, because it finances the deficit entirely with its own money. Thus, we could almost say, using a well-known image that's a little misleading, but it gets the point across, that since it runs the money machine, it's easy for the U.S. to finance its deficit.
In the 50s, the United States showered the world with dollars as part of its program for the reconstruction of Europe to begin with, the famous Marshall Plan.
Of the Western European nations finally affixed their signatures to a significant document. The Marshall Plan had received the green light. Reduced to its simplest form, the bulky Paris report meant that America must again send ammunition overseas. Ammunition for peace, in the form of food, machinery, skills, and dollars. Figures quoted reached $17 billion.
Then, in the 60s, the United States began buying up the world. They invested massively abroad, while at the same time supporting the military costs of the war in Vietnam. Everything was paid for in dollars, of course.
We were investing abroad more than the rest of the world was investing in the United States. So in the overall accounts, we had a deficit. It was a few $billion. It was minuscule compared to what we have now, but it excited people.
President de Gaulle was among the first to publicly criticized this, as he said in the 60s, that America having the main currency is an exorbitant privilege.
Ce fait entraîne les Américains à s'endetter et à s'endetter gratuitement vis-à-vis de l'étranger, car ce qu'ils lui doivent, ils le lui payent avec des dollars qu'il ne tient qu'à eux d'émettre, et non pas avec de l'or qui a une valeur réelle qu'on ne possède que pour l'avoir gagné et qu'on ne peut transférer à d'autres sans risque et sans sacrifice.
By the winter of 1964, France had taken a more aggressive stance, which it continued to pursue after 1965, by acting to convert its dollars into gold. Well, France was quite public about what it was doing, but the Germans were doing the same thing without saying anything. So the U.S. gold stock began to fall.
By that point, we had printed so many dollars that we only had about 20% coverage in gold for all the dollars held by central banks. And the fear was if they lost faith in the U.S. economy, it could be the equivalent of a run on a bank. They would all demand gold for their dollars at once. The U.S. would not be able to do it, and it would be a global financial calamity.
General de Gaulle decided to repatriate France's gold reserves from the Federal Reserve Bank. It was nothing more than a simple technical matter, but it caused a big stir politically.
General de Gaulle said to me, "Is the gold on its way back?" "Yes, sir, we're bringing it back." Then he said, "We need to speed things up. Listen, there needs to be a decision to send the Colbert," which was our only cruiser at the time. "We'll just send the Colbert over to Fort Knox, load up the gold, and bring it back." "Sir, that's out of the question. If you send a French warship over to the United States to fetch our gold, you'll create a major diplomatic incident." And so we gave up on that plan.
No, the Americans wouldn't have taken it very well, especially since they felt they were providing a necessary service to the rest of the world.
We Americans are the ones who create international liquidity for the entire world. We provide the financial intermediation. We enable the global financial system to function because we have the financial competitiveness that others don't have. It's a service, and if the dollar is a problem, then it's everyone else's problem, not ours.
This is an allusion to the famous remark made by Treasury Secretary John Connally to a delegation of Europeans who were complaining about his monetary policy. "The dollar is our currency, but your problem."
The decisions that are made by the Secretary of the Treasury and those who implement America's economic policies for the benefit of their own country have an impact on the rest of the world, which is reflected in what Connally was saying. It's our money. We manage it in our own best interests, and if the decisions we make don't suit you, it can become your problem.
John Connally wasn't an expert on the subject. He was a politician, a Texan. As you know, he was in President Kennedy's car when he was assassinated. A 6'4" giant, and he was a bit glib. He thought the financial world could be dealt with in an offhand way.
And he was a real arm twister in the sort of Texas tradition. And he told them, look, if you want to continue to get U.S. military support with the Soviet Union breathing down your neck, you guys are the ones who are going to have to make your currencies weaker. And that's how it's going to happen. And that way we can reduce our balance of payments.
The Bretton Woods system collapsed after the blow dealt by Nixon on August 15, 1971, when he decided to remove the gold backing from the dollar and turn it into a floating currency. A system of floating exchange rates is a completely different system. The rates for each currency on the international market are determined by supply and demand.
America today has the best opportunity in this century to achieve two of its greatest ideals: to bring about a full generation of peace and to create a new prosperity without war. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar. Now, this action will not win us any friends among the international money traders.
We'd been living with the idea of stable currencies, that the major currencies were stable. If there were fluctuations, they were unfortunate fluctuations that affected minor or secondary currencies. But the supreme currency, the dollar, was completely stable. That was the dominant way of thinking.
It was a big surprise, even to people that were close to the process, like myself. It had been kept very quiet. Only a very few people in the government were involved. Kissinger, in fact, was not involved. He was off negotiating about Vietnam at the time. So it was a very small circle of people. It was a big shock. The private markets were totally caught unaware.
And the Europeans and the Japanese expressed great shock. You mean you really want to change the exchange rates? I mean, what are you talking about, 2%? He said, look, forget about 2%. Let's talk about 10, 15%.
And that was it. The world of fixed exchange rates had become a thing of the past. From now on, the value of the dollar would change every morning, and not just a little. Let us imagine that the dollar's fluctuations since 1971 have been converted into a roller coaster ride. The peaks and the valleys of our virtual coaster reproduce the dollar's actual highs and lows. Fasten your seatbelts, hold on tight. It's going to be a hell of a ride. It starts out nice and smooth. This is the era of fixed rates. The value of the dollar is stable. Then at the beginning of the 70s, here we go. The first devaluation, 12%, a slight mechanical rise, the end of its convertibility, and hang on, it plunges 25%. Then President Carter appoints Paul Volcker as chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. He pushes interest rates up to over 20%. The dollar's value begins to rise higher and higher. Up 25%, up 50%, up 100%, 150, 200%. It becomes too expensive for everyone. The dollar has to be brought down. That's the goal of the Plaza Accord in 1985. In less than 2 years, the dollar falls and keeps falling. Whoa, it's going too far. So reverse operation in 1987. The major powers signed the Louvre Accords in Paris, whose purpose is to stabilize the dollar, which works pretty well for the next 10 years. Then comes the prosperous years of the Clinton era, which push it back up until 9/11 in 2001. The war in Iraq and low interest rates drive it back down again. Oof, okay, let's take one of these mountains and try to explain how it came about. The highest one of all, this one. The year is 1979. The American economy is in a bad state. The dollar is at an all-time low and inflation at an all-time high, with prices increasing nearly 15% per year. Something has to be done, so President Carter names Paul Volcker to take over the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, to wipe out inflation.
In the early 80s, Paul Volcker came in at a horrible period, a period in which several central bankers had failed to stop inflation. They would raise interest rates and hope it would be high enough, and then they would start to cut, and inflation would come back again. And it was like a doctor prescribing an antibiotic to a patient but not giving him enough. So you would kill the disease momentarily, but then it would come back even stronger, and you needed an even bigger dose of the antibiotic the next time.
And the Federal Reserve had to push interest rates to what Helmut Schmidt called the highest level since Jesus Christ.
Central bankers have one big weapon for killing inflation, and that's the base rate, the minimum interest rate for lending money in a given country. Low interest rates stimulate the economy, but this also increases inflation. On the other hand, when interest rates are very high, this slows down the economy and inflation decreases. The trick is figuring out exactly where to put the cursor.
The predominant thing then was a high and rising rate of domestic inflation. So when you ask what my priority was, it was to deal with the domestic inflation. But by dealing with the domestic inflation, you would also deal with the weakness of the dollar.
So from 1981 to 1985, the dollar kept rising and rising while inflation kept falling and falling, and the economy kept shrinking and shrinking. Meanwhile, people were suffering. No one could afford to pay the 20% interest rates.
Home builders were particularly upset. We had this great period when the home builders, they weren't always serious, I think, but they would saw up 2x4s, the basic piece of home building material. And they chopped them up and sent them into my office.
Saying, we're never going to get to put these to work, you take them. People still stop them in the street, put a finger in his chest and say, you're the reason my father lost his job, you're the reason we couldn't sell our house.
In 1984, the dollar was so high that governments decided it was time to intervene. An international meeting was convened at the Plaza Hotel in New York.
Europeans were finding that inflation was getting too high and buying Nike running shoes or Caterpillar tractors or even a barrel of oil, which of course is priced in dollars, was becoming exorbitantly expensive.
The only solution possible was either a monetary agreement or protectionism. Faced with the threat of a protectionist movement, the Americans said, okay, this is a deal we need to try and work out together with everyone.
The world powers agreed to intervene and weaken the dollar because it had become too strong.
There would be other peaks, but the roller coaster would never climb as high again. Most would coincide with major international crises: the Mexican debt crisis, the Asian financial crisis, the economic collapse of Argentina, the dot-com bubble crash. Given all this turbulence and such a rough ride for the passengers, we might wonder, is anyone at the wheel here? That is, who is in charge of the dollar in the United States?
The Fed is the central bank of the United States, so our role is comparable to the European Central Bank's role, or the Banque de France roles before EMU, in some sense. So our job is to, by law, is to promote price stability and maximum sustainable growth, and to keep the financial system as stable as possible.
The Fed is made up of 12 regional Federal Reserve banks whose stockholders are the successors to those big local banks in the 19th century that were allowed to print their own dollars. This makes the Fed quite unique in that it's practically the only central bank in the world that is not public, but in fact, private.
The reserve banks, such as the New York one we're in now, are actually owned by commercial banks, owned by the members of the Federal Reserve System. However, their governments, the way they're organized, is under pretty strict government oversight and control. The term that's sometimes used, it's a technical term I hear the lawyers use, we are instrumentalities of the federal government. So in effect, we are very technically private corporations, but very, very closely supervised by the federal government.
To manufacture its banknotes, the Fed has its own historic printer, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in Washington, which is a public agency.
We produce about 8 billion notes annually, which is about $750 million in terms of face value on a daily basis.
This place is so significant for the American people that there is a walkway overlooking the production floor to accommodate visitors. As for the machines, they look like they've been around for a while, which really isn't very surprising given the fact that the dollar hasn't changed in size or color since 1929. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing produces 22 tons of crisp new bills every day that are distributed throughout the country via a network of carriers and district banks. The United States is a country that is particularly cash-oriented. Practically 1 out of every $10 is an actual physical banknote. The 9 others are just numbers sitting inside computers in the banks. 1 out of 10 might not seem like a lot, but that's double the British pound, the yen, or the euro, whose banknotes have never represented more than 5% of their national money supply. Moreover, contrary to what one might think, the number of bills in circulation is not decreasing, but increasing, despite the advent of credit cards.
There's a constant cycle of transport and processing going on. In a given month, in the tens of billions of dollars would flow through our system.
There are 2 main reasons for this particularly intensive use of American paper currency. The first one is purely domestic.
Is something like 15% of the American households are unbanked. They deal only in cash. So for many of those people, it's the only means they have to make a payment. So cash, for a variety of different purposes, still is just very, very important, and it's something that everybody needs.
The second reason for the huge mass of bills in circulation comes from the dollar's status as an international currency.
There are over 777 billion notes in circulation, of which over 512 billion circulates outside its borders in terms of value. The vast majority of the notes that circulate outside its borders are primarily notes that are used as a stored value for people who look to have an emergency fund.
Which is why one must be very cautious and not make any hasty alterations.
The banknote design process is a very complicated process. And so we start with a security parameter. We do add complexity to the design by layering features over each other. We then go to the artist to render an aesthetic drawing incorporating each and every one of these security features. The process is very, very long. When we redesigned our 5 recently, it took a little bit more than a year, and that was a remarkably very rapid kind of a design.
Indeed, it was nothing short of revolutionary, for the Greenback isn't totally green anymore. A bit of color has been added. We're at the launching ceremony for the new $5 bill. The cottage in the background belonged to Abraham Lincoln, the father of the dollar bill.
Hold the bill up to light. We began introducing the new Color of Money series in 2003. The new $5 bill combines some new security features. As always, there's no need to trade the old design $5 bills for new ones because the Federal Reserve has never recalled any of its bills and has no plans to do so this time. In just a few minutes, it'll be my honor to spend the first new $5 bill and officially enter it into circulation. I'd like to purchase a book of great speeches.
Okay, well, we just happen to have a book right here, and it's full of great speeches.
Great. I think I have a new $5 bill.
Really?
It's right here.
I hear that they have some new security features.
Yes, very good. Hold it up to light.
Okay, let's give them a break. They're just government officials, not professional actors. The man in the foreground is a Fed representative. The man right behind him belongs to the Secret Service, an ultra-specialized police force that has two very specific missions: to protect the President of the United States and the dollar. In other words, to defend it against counterfeiters. The woman on the left is from the Department of the Treasury. She's the Treasurer of the United States, and her signature is on all of the new $5 bills. And so, for the children, and especially for the cameras, here's a quick lesson on counterfeit detection.
The people out front. Who's our first line of defense for stopping counterfeiters?
You.
You. What is the first thing you're going to do to make sure this is a real bill?
Put it
in the light, right. Abraham Lincoln's face, right there. Now, in the new one, we have two watermarks, right? A big 5, no face anymore, and a column of little 5s. You saw that when it came around, right?
The level of counterfeiting that was successfully passed was right at $61.4 million. Now that sounds like a lot. In the totality of the picture, that actually amounts to 1/100%.
What kind of material is money made out of?
That's a great question. The secret formula, but it's essentially, though, it's a fabric more than anything else. That's why it lasts so long. But even then, it's got a short lifespan, probably somewhere between 2 and 5 years, depending on the denomination.
Like all great international stars, the dollar has its own unique look, its own style. But in fact, why is it so striking to the eye, so visually effective? What is its secret?
First of all, the color is very important. And then there are all the symbols on it. It's almost like having a live history of the United States and of American philosophy on each and every dollar bill.
Yes, indeed, American bills strike the imagination because they are covered with the mysterious symbols that are supposedly Masonic and date back to the beginning of the American Revolution.
The back of the dollar bill is what most people think about when they think about the symbolism of the dollar bill. In the front, you have George Washington, the first leader of the nation, and in fact, Freemason. So in that sense, there's a Freemason on the dollar bill there. The back of the bill seems so much more mysterious, even to Americans.
On the back, both sides of the Great Seal of the United States are featured. The seal was designed in the 18th century by a committee that included Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin.
There's a huge kind of feeling on the part of people that these seals and these symbols have deeper kinds of meanings. Enormous numbers of people count the number of feathers in the eagle. There are actually 33 of them, which conspiracy theorists say 33, that's exactly the number of the Scottish Rite degrees. And so a 33rd degree Mason is fairly well known in America. And here, if you count them up, you find it there. So many right-wing Americans have seen this as something sinister, even a sign of a great conspiracy for the taking over of the world by sinister kinds of elites.
However, among the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence, only 9 were Freemasons. George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, for example, but not Thomas Jefferson or John Adams.
And I think the link there is not that Masons conspired, plotted to create the revolution, but it's that the ideals of the revolution come out of the same sort of enlightened values as Freemasonry.
So we should see the dollar's aesthetic design as inspired by a common interest, which these 19th century men apparently shared, in esotericism, Christian symbolism, and even Egyptology, as attested to by the front side of the Great Seal.
So the pyramid, the ancient Egyptian symbol, lasted for thousands of years. That's what the American nation is going to be. So that's the one part. Then above it you have the eye, which is the all-seeing eye of God, and sort of very long-lasting symbol which goes back for hundreds of years before then. And the idea of that eye is that God has been watching over the new American nation.
Indeed, the dollar is so closely linked to God that it is the only currency in the Western world that is explicitly placed under His protection. It displays the famous motto, "In God we trust," which so greatly intrigues non-Americans.
The American people have always been a religious people, and the government has always in some way acknowledged that. In 1861, at the very beginning of the American Civil War, a minister in Pennsylvania very famously wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury, a man named Salmon P. Chase. And this minister said that, look, the country is engaged in this terrible war with itself. Clearly, we need divine providence. We need God's help. This minister implored the Secretary of the Treasury to put the name of God somewhere. The director wrote a couple of sample mottos, none of which, by the way, were "In God We Trust," and sent them off to Chase, who then fiddled around with them a little bit, changed one of them around, and came up eventually with "In God We Trust." In the 1930s, the late 1930s, it began to appear on all American coins. And in 1957, it began to appear on American paper currency. First the $5 bill, and then all of our paper currency. So now, a little more than 50 years after it first began appearing on our paper currency, it is on all of our coins, it's on all of our paper currency. It's also our national motto.
One person said to me once, "Mr. Lincoln, in God we trust and the rest pay cash."
The real dollar, however, the one that has the most influence, is not the dollar bill. The real dollar is the electronic dollar, the one that only exists virtually in bank computers, and that can also be transferred instantaneously to anywhere on the planet from trading rooms like this one. These computers are used to buy and sell dollars 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for huge corporations, financial institutions, individuals, or even mere speculators.
Okay. So we're bidding, all right, you got 2 at 45 over there. You booked to Garrett Trading, whatever I am?
I need to sell 2 at 50.
Yeah, I got that on there. Oil just hit the $10 limit. Euros bid beyond belief right now. Are you still interested in taking some profits on? All right, we'll work it at 75 if we can get there. All right, good till 3. Okay, bye.
Those buttons with buy and sell written on them are what determine the price of the dollar. The broker's job is to press or not to press. But how is this decision made?
You got him. What people look at is the difference in interest rates between countries. That's what attracts the capital. That's where money flows in or out of, or what causes money to flow in or out of different countries. So what we look for is indications of what's going to change that interest rate difference between, for example, Europe and the U.S.
So that's the basic principle. Today, however, the foreign exchange market has grown to such colossal proportions that $2,000 to $3,000 billion are bought and sold every day across the entire planet. And in order to keep up, the brokers have long since switched to automatic pilot.
Automatic trading machines will allow you to make transactions where you don't ever touch them. It's called straight-through processing, STP. All the computers talk to each other and the trade is done. You can move hundreds of millions of dollars in a few seconds. It's amazing.
And now you get to know what we do all day. We sit around and look at TV screens.
And the fact that everyone is looking at the same screens at the same time is something that radically influences the way the market behaves.
It used to be that not everyone would get the same information at the same time. Now with the internet, with everything being instant, everyone's looking at the same charts. Everyone's looking at the same news releases, the same statements by officials. And everyone, because they get the information at the same time, tends to react at the same time.
There's one last factor that might explain the dollar's extreme volatility on the currency exchange market.
The movement of the currency, at least in the short term, is almost totally driven by the market's feelings, its expansiveness or its fear. It's only how does the world feel when it gets up in the morning? Is it happy? In which case, often sells dollars when it's happy. Or is it scared? In which case, it's going to buy dollars. It is totally irrational in the short term. It's one of the reasons why nobody can manage it.
In the early years, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the central banks were the biggest factors in the market. But then, as the market grew, their influence shrunk. So, in the early days, governments could intervene in currency markets, buy the currency or sell the currency, and determine the price that way. But as the market grew, they couldn't do it anymore.
And nowadays, the U.S. government has even less control over the value of its currency, since out of $100, only $30 are in the hands of Americans. The other $70 belong to foreigners, mainly central banks and investment funds. The countries with the biggest dollar holdings are China, first of all, followed by the Gulf oil monarchies, and then Japan. Europe is much further behind, along with Russia, India, etc. This is Bahrain, a country located in the Persian Gulf. It is estimated that in their vaults, the oil-rich countries of this region hold a good 25% of all the dollars on the planet. Today, Sheikh Mohammed Al Khalifa is inaugurating an exhibition conference with a very special theme, the dollar or the euro, what is the best choice for the region? The exhibitors are representatives of big brokerage and investment firms from London and New York. The visitors, their potential clients, are local government officials, CEOs, and even a few wealthy individuals. The dollar has a much greater importance in this part of the world than anywhere else. And this is the direct result of the famous meeting between King Ibn Saud of Saudi Arabia and President Franklin D. Roosevelt on board an American warship near the Suez Canal in 1945. Whether this was a negotiation between equal partners or pure imperialism, the outcome was an agreement that the United States would protect the Arabian Peninsula in exchange for access to the Saudi oil resources. Ever since then, the price of oil has been set in dollars, and the Gulf state currencies have been pegged to the dollar. So it's hardly surprising that in conjunction with the exhibition, a conference has been arranged with American economists who have been invited to speak on the dollar's fluctuations.
U.S., since the Second World War, as the largest economy in the world, and its currency, which has been forever talked about as the world reserve currency. And we're going to look at a little bit about what that means and how that may be changing. The dollar has been in a measured but steady decline.
It's a market that is so big, nobody can control it. This is a world market, especially now. Is there the question, will Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, will they continue to peg their currency against the dollar, or will they let it float?
It's very difficult, really. We have lost already 40% of our currency.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
People are really getting worried. What's happening with the dollar? The governments in the Gulf region are going to be making a lot of top-level decisions in the next few months. Kuwait, as we've already seen, has basically depegged its currency from the US dollar. And it's possible that other countries will follow Kuwait's example. This is the end of the US dollar. It was a good father for the region. And you know how painful it is to lose a good father.
But it doesn't mean that we have to leave the dollar. So market forces in the end, it will show us that maybe we use another euro or dollar, another currency or commodity.
I'm always fond of saying that the dollar has been the dominant world currency for about a century for one simple reason. There was no competition. That has all now changed, of course, with the creation of the euro.
Has what has been going on in Frankfurt, the headquarters of the European Central Bank, in the last 10 years really changed the monetary picture of the world? Is the almighty dollar, King Dollar, about to be dethroned by the euro?
I think that the euro has the potential to become the equivalent of the dollar as a world reserve currency, or even to surpass it.
For Europeans, it's a phenomenal success.
If the euro were more militant, or were to try to be more militant, it would probably dethrone the dollar in very little time.
The euro wasn't created against the US dollar. It wasn't created against any currency, or anyone at all.
The ambition of the United States, and what I'm saying isn't an oversimplification, is basically imperialistic, being the superpower of the world. That's not our ambition. We don't want to govern the world. We did, in part, in the 19th century, but that's not our mission anymore.
And so, since the euro rivals the dollar without wanting or being able to replace it completely, what does that mean for the future of the planet?
I think we're heading for a situation in which there will be a big North American bloc, a big Chinese bloc, a big Indian bloc, and perhaps a big European bloc.
I think over time, it is likely the system will evolve to the point where the dollar's role is less exceptional. And I think that would be a perfectly natural, healthy thing for the world economy.
And the final word goes to Paul Volcker, who has taken out his crystal ball for the occasion.
I will make two statements. One is that the world will be well off in time with a world currency. Statement number two, it's not going to happen in my lifetime. I'm not even sure it's going to happen in your lifetime.
This here, we have a $sign beanie. This is a $sign money clip. This is a bandana, while you're bike riding or jogging. And this just goes to show that literally head to toe, people in America, we're obsessed about the dollar, we're obsessed about money, and we wear it.